Hello, my name is Connie Nordhelm Wooldridge, and I have a book I'd like to share with you. I'd like to say a special thank you to Mr. Andrew Glass, who created the wonderful illustrations and has graciously given me permission to use them for this reading of Thank You Very Much, Captain Ericsson. Captain John Ericsson was a Swedish-born engineer and inventor. When he wasn't busy succeeding, he was busy failing, gloriously. Sometimes his failures were his own fault, but more often the fault was in the eyes of those who looked at his inventions and couldn't manage to see out of the present and into the possible. Take the fire engine he invented in 1828 when he left Sweden and went to live in England. What a beauty it was, sleek and efficient with a steam-powered boiler. It could shoot gallons of water as high as 90 feet. But such a quantity of water, complained the London Fire Brigade. Surely such a deluge would cause mischief. They were perfectly content to sprinkle fires with hand pumps and pray for rain. No, we'll not be needing your steam fire engine, thank you very much, Captain Ericsson, sniffed the London Fire Brigade. So in 1829, John designed a steam locomotive, the Novelty, which he built in 7 weeks and entered in a race called the Rainhill Trials. Clutching his top hat in one hand and the guardrail with the other, he flew down the tracks at the death-defying speed of 30 miles per hour. But the directors of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway trembled as they watched. Was such speed advisable? Was it healthy? They much preferred safety, security, and slower-moving scenery. On its last run, the Novelty's engine faltered. The directors of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway heaved sighs of relief and awarded the prize to a slower engine. No, we'll not be needing your steam locomotive, thank you very much, Captain Ericsson, they told him. So in 1837, John attached the screw propeller he just invented to a tugboat and demonstrated how efficient it was by towing the very starched Lords of the Admiralty down the Thames in their very proper barge. But the Lords of the Admiralty preferred the familiar splash of the paddle wheel. You could see a paddle wheel. You could know precisely that the paddle wheel was moving the boat. There was something highly suspicious about this newfangled screw propeller that did its work underwater, out of sight, and silently. No, we'll not be needing your screw propeller, thank you very much, Captain Ericsson, declared the Lords of the Admiralty. The British decided John Ericsson had a screw loose. John decided he was ready for a new place with new eyes. So when an American acquaintance, Captain Robert F. Stockton, suggested he design a warship for the United States Navy, John Ericsson sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to New York City. The wooden warship he created upon his arrival was called the Princeton. The Princeton was fast, turned on a dime, and was outfitted with newly designed guns. The Navy brass recognized it as a work of genius, and their admiration caused Captain Stockton, as commanding officer, to forget the inventor completely and bask in the praise for this fantastic ship all by himself. That is, until some very important people were touring the ship and a gun, which was practically the only thing Stockton had designed, suddenly exploded. The disaster brought the inventor's name back to Stockton's mind. Stingy about sharing the praise, he was more than willing to share the blame. John Ericsson was never paid for his work on the Princeton, and he vowed he would have nothing more to do with the United States Navy. For almost 20 years he kept that vow. But after the Civil War began, a man named Cornelius Bushnell knocked on the door of John's New York home, wanting to show him something. It was a model of an ironclad ship the North wanted to build. According to Mr. Bushnell, the South was at work on its own ironclad and meant to use it to break up the blockade the North had set up. Unless the Ironclad Board, appointed by President Lincoln, could come up with something to challenge the South's ironclad, the North's flimsy wooden ships would be reduced to matchsticks, the blockade would be broken, and the Confederates would be able to ship in the guns and supplies they needed to keep fighting. Would John Ericsson examine Mr. Bushnell's model to see if it would be stable enough to float? The inventor in John Ericsson couldn't resist taking a look. He assured Mr. Bushnell the model ship would float if built. Then John showed Mr. Bushnell an ironclad model of his own that he had designed years before. As soon as he laid eyes on it, Mr. Bushnell realized John Ericsson's model was exactly the thing the Union Navy needed to hold the blockade. He hurried back to Washington to show the ironclad board John's model, and he convinced the inventor to follow him a few days later. But when John arrived, the ironclad board greeted him with the same words he'd heard too many times before. "No, we'll not be needing your ironclad ship. Thank you very much, Captain Ericsson." By this time, John Ericsson had had quite enough of rejection, thank you very much. He demanded to know the board's objections to his design. He answered every one of those objections with such confidence and brilliance that the board members had the uncomfortable feeling that not building Ericsson's ironclad amounted to an act of sheer stupidity. "Gentlemen," John concluded, "I consider it your duty to your country to give me an order to build this vessel before I leave this room." The order was given. A contract was signed. 101 working days later, the USS Monitor was launched. The South's ironclad, the Merrimac, was hard about the business of sinking Union ships at Hampton Roads, Virginia, when, on March 9, 1862, the Monitor arrived on the scene. If the Monitor could stop the destruction and hold the blockade, the tide of the war would turn. But no clear-thinking onlooker would have bet money on the strange-looking little Monitor. The Merrimac was 4 times her size and carried 10 guns to her 2. It was sure the Merrimac would swat the Monitor away like a bothersome fly and then finish off the Union fleet. But the Merrimac's size made her slow and clumsy and afraid of low tides and shallow waters. Most of the Monitor floated below the waterline, which meant there was little for the Merrimac to aim her guns at. The 2 ironclads battled for 4.5 furious hours until the Merrimac, leaking a bit and low on fuel, hauled off. Both ships claimed victory. Only slightly damaged herself, the Merrimac had sunk one of the Union ships and burned another before the Monitor arrived. Surely she was the winner of the battle. But the North had a different view. The North insisted that victory was not determined by number of ships sunk, but by which side reached its larger military goal. By that measure, the Union's Monitor was clearly the victor. The blockade held, saved by John Ericsson's crazy-looking cheese box on a raft, his tin can on a shingle. The South supply line through Chesapeake Bay was choked off at Hampton Roads. The inventor with a screw loose was a hero. John Ericsson kept his eyes fixed on the possible and cranked out invention after invention until he died at the age of 85. Thousands turned out to watch as his casket was carried through the streets of New York City and placed aboard the ship that would carry him back to Sweden for burial. Every flag in the harbor flew at half-mast, and a fleet of monitors fired a salute. It was all a way of saying, finally, and at long last, "Thank you very much, Captain John Ericsson."